is part 3 of my Jon Snow tutorial in colored pencil. We are going to be working on the fur and leather of his clothing. I totally want to call it his outfit, but my husband keeps making fun of me every time I use that word. Hi, I'm Lisa, the artist behind Lachri Fine Art. We are finishing up this portrait. All of the supplies that I have used are listed below in the video description. If you are supporters over on Patreon, the 2-hour version of this tutorial is available for you now, complete with voiceover, and I have included quite a few real-time clips into that, so you can really see how I'm moving my pencil strokes for creating fur and leather. Now let's get on to this tutorial. We are finally on to part 3 of this portrait tutorial. So looking at the clothing, we're starting with the leather. The thing with this, both for the leather and for the fur, the colors that I'm using are the exact same that I used on the hair and on the face. And so the way that I've got to separate this section from the hair and the face is by creating a look of different texture. I have to make sure that this does not just kind of blend into that. And because I'm not using contrast or color to separate these, then that difference in texture is a very big deal. So what I start off doing is just blocking in approximately where my darks go. I don't have my pencils super sharp here. I will sharpen them more as I get further into this when I get to the final layers. For these first few layers, it's just putting things, my lights and my darks, where they need to be. And blending that out with the Mona Lisa odorless paint thinner. Gamsol works exactly the same. While that dries, I'm going to move down to this section here. And all I'm doing is copying what I see on that reference photo. I like to block in everything first with the black. It just makes it a little easier for me. But I will come back over it, you can see there, with the gray. I'm not leaving everything just flat black. And anywhere where I use a lot of black, and I do like my black pencils, but I don't leave them just black. I'm always going to put blue or purple or red or other colors into them or on top of them. Otherwise, it ends up looking very flat. So here, moving on to the next section, I'm just breaking it up one little section at a time. I'm not trying to do everything at the same time or it gets very overwhelming. My main focus right now is on the leather. I will get the leather almost completely finished and then I will move on to the hair, or the fur, I should say. You can see I'm using that purple in there. And for my initial layers, the majority of the pencils that I'm using are my polychromos. When I get onto final layers where I really need the color to show up over the dark, I'm going to switch mostly over to my luminance for a lot of the light grays and whites. Blending that out with the Mona Lisa odorless paint thinner. And that is a Taklon bristled filbert brush that I'm blending with. Once I get several layers on here, I'm going to let that dry, and now I can come on top of this with my grays and whites. Now I'm using the luminance pencils. Look at how nicely those show up over the black. Now the reason that they're showing up, because I get a lot of people asking me, why I can't get the whites or the light colors to show up. Two things can be happening. One, you may be damaging the tooth of your paper. I work continuously with a very light hand. Anywhere where I've pushed very hard, that pencil is not going to stick on top of because there's nothing for it to grip to. The type of paper that you're using can make a big difference. I've used Bristol vellum and that does not allow for this technique to work well. It was just too smooth, and again, going back to there was nothing for the pencil to grip to. So here, I'm working on Stonehenge. I'm doing the individual sheets, not the sheets sold in the pads. Those are, again, back to Bristol vellum type where it's too smooth. But I keep a very light hand, lots and lots of layers, but very light. That's one of the things that I like so much about using the paint thinner, is it allows me to block in a lot and do a lot of layers without ever damaging that paper. Then when I come on top with my more opaque pencils, that's going to be my wax-based pencils, and for me that is luminance. They show up really well. I'm never going to get anything back to completely white, but I can lighten things up a lot. So pencil pressure, pencil type, and paper type will all play a role in how many layers you're able to get and whether or not you can get your lights to show up over the darks like I do. So for the fur, anytime I'm doing animal fur, this is pretty much how I work. I like to block in my general shapes. This right now does not look like fur. This looks like a horrible mess. I've blocked everything in with my black. I don't care about the lines being perfect. When I work on the face, everything needs to be perfect. Here, not so much. And then I did several layers of gray on top of that. And the reason I did several layers, a lot of it is the same color of gray. It's not that I have to use a medium gray and then a light gray and then a dark gray. I just need a lot of pigment on the paper. If there's not enough pigment from your pencils on the paper when you blend out with the paint thinner like I'm doing here, nothing will happen. It won't blend. There's nothing for it to blend. You need a lot of that pigment on the paper before you blend out with your paint thinner. So I'm going to let that dry completely, and it appears that I don't let things dry just because this is sped up. I do. You have to let that paper dry or you can damage the tooth of the paper, which limits the amount of layers you can do and whether or not the light's going to stand up later, like we were talking about earlier. But I'm going to repeat that same process that I just did. Get my darks in, then get another lighter color over that several times before I come on top with the detail. I really need to get this dark enough in order for the lights to show up the way that I need them to. And I'm copying my reference photo. I'm looking at it, but I don't need it to be exact. I need it to be close. I'm not going to spend an extra 10 to 12 hours making sure every little hair, every little line is exact. It's not that important. What I need is to make sure I'm creating that texture. And so I copy it close, but I'm not going to waste tons of time making sure something like this is exact. It is very close though. You can see, this is exactly what I did before, where I did the black and then went on top with the gray. Then I'll blend that out with the paint thinner so I get that nice smooth look. And it's a lot easier if you break this up into sections versus trying to do the entire animal or the entire section of fur like I'm doing here. Now that that dries, I can start coming on top with a few of my details. I've got to make sure that these pencils are much sharper now. This is a stage where you want your pencils super, super sharp. I love the Coombe long pointed sharpener for this. And the nice thing with the luminance is that they actually work well when you sharpen with that. You can get a really fine point on those. Not quite as fine as the polychromos, but still you can see I'm getting a really nice point on those. Now I'm building up the lights, and look how great that shows up over my blacks because I never damaged my paper. And I've got to build this into clumps. The big trick here is don't draw a bunch of individual strands. That's where a lot of people go wrong. They want to draw every single little individual hair, and it won't look right. It will never look right if you work that way. Look at how I'm building this into clumps, and I'm still getting that texture. Paying attention to where the lights and the darks go. And this fur especially is really clumped together. It's not that fur will always be this clumped. Just look at your reference photo. Copy what you see. Coming down to this section now and better defining some of my darks. And it gets to where it's really a lot easier the more layers into this that I get because I've already got the detail. I already can see where my darks go. So I'm not having to stare at the reference photo as much as I did in the beginning. I still have to check it constantly, but it's not as constant. Got to get this nice and dark so that the lights will show up over it. Even pulling a bit of purple in there, like I talked about before. I don't generally leave the blacks just black. It ends up looking very flat. And I will come back through this later with some blue as well, a very pale blue, just to make everything feel much cooler. Now for these little hairs, I'm doing these little squiggles. It's kind of these little tiny frizzy hairs. And look at how far back my hand is on that pencil. I'm keeping this very, very loose so that I get that very woolly feel. And this, again, what I was talking about before, I've got to create texture. This is about creating the texture in the fur because the color's the exact same as his hair. The difference here is the texture, the pencil strokes that I'm doing, the shapes. And when you're drawing fur, that's a big thing. Look at it as abstract shapes. Don't look at it as fur. Flip it upside down if you need to. Work upside down. That will help a lot to get your brain not to look at it as hair or as fur. But look at the abstract shapes. It'll feel weird as you're working on it, but if you can teach yourself to just copy the shapes that you see, your work is going to be so much more realistic. Now with that white pencil, I will sometimes push a little bit harder for the areas that I really want to pop out. But most of what I'm doing here is with a fairly light hand. It appears that I'm pushing harder just because my middle finger bends backwards a lot. I'm really not. I'm not pushing hard at all. And I'm just going to keep building and building. And the great thing is, because I've continuously built with a light hand, I'm not pushing hard, I can go back and forth over this all I want. I recently had a video talking about overworking your work, and I had a lot of people asking me about colored pencil. Well, you can overwork colored pencil because it won't take anymore. Yes and no. Really what's happening there is just bad technique. You're pushing too hard, and that's what's not allowing you to get your additional layers. I don't push hard until the very last layers. I may do a bit of burnishing at the very, very end, but not until I know that's my last layer. I don't need anything to go over that. You want to get in the habit when you work with the techniques that I'm using here of not pushing so hard. I mean, you want to push hard enough that your pigment is coming off on the paper. I've seen people take that too literal where you can't see any color coming off their pencil onto the paper. A little harder than that, but you do want to keep it fairly light. So again, you don't want to damage that paper. I'm just going to keep building and building until I like how this looks. It's basically a rinse and repeat process. Each layer is pretty similar to my previous layer. I just keep building until it looks like my photo. Paying attention to all the little details. This is a slow process. Anytime you're doing animal fur, it takes a very, very long time. It's the same as when you draw people hair. It's not a fast process. So it's one of those things that you've just got to plan on spending a lot of time working on. It's very tedious. It will feel like it's not that important. And this isn't a big lesson for you. Don't think that just because it's the clothing, it's not that big of a deal and that you can rush over it. If you do the most amazing job on the face and hair and you rush over the clothing, it pulls down your overall piece by a lot. Your whole painting or drawing does not look nearly as good as it could because of that. I mean, it seems like common sense, but it's something that we do a lot. We think, oh, it's the clothing, I don't need to pay as much attention. While you don't need it to be exactly perfect, you do need to spend as much attention. You need to make sure your contrast is where it needs to be, that your detail is what it needs to be. You've got to pay attention to every little square inch of your painting or drawing is just as important as every other square inch. That's not to say that every square inch will have the same amount of detail, but you need to put the same amount of attention into that, into making sure that it's just right. So I'm going to speed over this really quickly. This is just the same exact thing that I did on the other side. Blocked in my darks, went over with a medium color, then blocked in darks again, and just going to keep doing that until I get it to look like the other side. Once I get that to where it's pretty similar to what the other side is, that's when I start going back and forth between the two and focusing on smaller details, making sure my contrast is where it should be. The lighting at this section, I was working during the day, and so it looks kind of faded and washed out. There we go. We're back at night and the color's better. My lighting was terrible. I didn't realize that as I was recording. So here I'm painting on, I'm using the touch-up texture mixed with titanium white from brushandpencil.com. I will have a link below in the video description. I've shared how I mix those two products before, and then I can paint it directly onto my piece to get my white highlights. This is great for whiskers and hairs. It is so, so helpful. Or little dots, like the little dots in the eye to make them look sparkly, or you can see I'm doing some of the dots on the lips. It just gives it that little bit of an extra punch. So that link will be below in the video description if you want to check that out. But that is it, and that finally completes our 3-part video set of painting, or drawing in this case, Jon Snow. Let me know if you have any questions. If you missed either part 1 or 2 of this video, I will have a card pop up here so you can check those out. Thanks for watching. Again, if you are supporters over on Patreon, the 2-hour version of this tutorial is available for you now, complete with voiceover, so make sure to head over and check that out. If you're new to my channel, I have new video critiques every Tuesday where I'm critiquing your original paintings or drawings, my own speed paintings, drawings, and tutorials every Wednesday, art Q&A videos every Thursday, and artist vlogs each weekend. So if you haven't already, I would love for you to subscribe so you don't miss out on anything. And you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Google+. All of those social media sites are linked below in the video description where you can keep up with news, my newest work, and see real-time clips of whatever it is I'm currently working on. At the end of last week's video, I showed you guys the conversation I had with my mom where she wanted to see what I was working on. I sent her a photo of this, and she had to show me it. A few days later, I get an envelope in the mail from my mom from California, and I'm like, why? What is she sending me? She sends me a piece of paper with a sticky note on it that says, "I wanted you to have the original. You're welcome. Signed, Mommy." Yep, be jealous. I have her original drawing now. And the best part is she actually signed the bottom corner with Mommy. My mom's hilarious. In all seriousness, I am totally going to frame this so she sees it on my wall next time she visits.